This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, Charlotte parents' worst fears are realized when a Butler High School student is shot and killed on campus by another student. The next day, a gun is found at Garinger High, but without incident. That and the murders of 11 people at a Pittsburgh Synagogue on Saturday have Charlotteans focusing on guns. Early voting sets record numbers of turnout in advance of next Tuesday, which of course is Election Day. And the digital revolution claims 31-year-old Creative Loafing. Without realizing it, staffers published the last print edition this week. Our roundtable of reporters is ready to detail those and other stories, and those reporters include Steve Harrison from WFAE News. Welcome back.
Good morning.
And Doss Helms is here from the Charlotte Observer, where she's the education reporter.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Glenn Berkins is the editor-publisher of QCityMetro.com.
Good morning.
And Nick Oxner joins us from WBTV News. Welcome back.
I wore a tie to celebrate the occasion of you saying my name correctly.
Well, good.
I knew it would happen.
And you're also facing our Facebook Live camera. You can also watch us there. Fear and confusion in the halls at Butler High School on Monday morning as one 16-year-old student shoots another 16-year-old student.
Kids are crying. It's a mess.
Cell phone video from the scene shot by another student as staff tried to move them away from the scene and into classrooms. Here's what Butler student Lane McNary says he witnessed.
I see wrestling. The two kids are wrestling, and then I'm right there. I hear pop, 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 and everyone's running. People trampling over each other. Everyone was running to class, trying to find the closest classroom that they could get into.
Bobby McKeithen would die later that morning at the hospital. His assailant, Jatwan Craig Cuffey, was arrested, charged with first-degree murder. We heard that bullying was at the crux of this, and the Observer reported this week what happened on Monday morning at the school started on Friday night outside a grocery store. What do we know about that?
Well, we know that there was a fight between several teenagers and that Jatwan Cuffey, the young man who is charged with the shooting, was actively participating. There is video of him being knocked to the ground and punched and kicked. And we know that Bobby McKeithen, who was shot to death, was there but apparently not actively participating in the fight. So this was Friday night in a Harris Teeter parking lot. Over the weekend, there were texts, there was social media, there was the kind of talk between teenagers that is almost impenetrable to the rest of us trying to figure out what was actually going on. But there was an exchange between Jatwan and Bobby, and when they came into school, and Jatwan has said that he went out to the woods and got his gun, which was a stolen gun, and brought it to school. There was a lot of talk that there was going to be some revival of the fight at school, and the two encountered each other. It happened very quickly. Again, social media and and the video shot by kids is out there so quickly. We have seen an actual video shot apparently by a student that shows it actually happening. It is over very quickly. Again, you have to sympathize with people who are trying to sort out on the scene what was going on, because you heard that student say, "I heard pop, pop, pop." There's no indication that there were 3 shots. There was, from all we can tell, 1 shot. And the young man who was shot stayed on his feet. So even Jatwan told police that he did not think he had hit him. And he ran off and ran to a teacher's classroom, basically said this is what happened, turned himself in. But Bobby McKeithen was fatally wounded.
So we really don't know what happened on Tuesday morning, except for the fact that a shot was fired and a student died. We don't know
Monday morning.
Monday morning. We don't know precisely what precipitated the incident that led to Jatwan taking out his gun.
Right, and that's, the bullying phrase came out of Clayton Wilcox's mouth from the very first news conference, and I think that further, in some ways, complicated things. I think what he was trying to do was make sure that the young man who fired the shot was not demonized, was in trying to perhaps take some responsibility as a school system, but bullying is a phrase that indicates a clear aggressor and a clear victim. And I think when he said that, the question on everybody's mind was, are you saying that the young man who was shot was bullying the person who did the shooting? And
so we still don't know who was bullying. If there was any bullying involved, we don't know who was bullying.
It looks more like a conflict than like a bullying, although, again, we just don't know everything. It may be that this will emerge. Jatwan's account does not make it sound like he was the victim, but you also have to figure that 16-year-olds don't want to appear weak.
And he was afraid enough to go into the woods and get a gun to bring to school.
Right.
Well, that's right. And we got some detail, at least from Tawan's side of the story, right, in the
Right.
felony affidavit that was filed by the Matthews police, and they charged him with first-degree murder. And so, basically, as he tells it, there had been this fight. Bobby had threatened, essentially told him that they were going to fight again on Monday. Bobby wasn't involved in the first fight, really. He was connected kind of tangentially, and kind of made it clear, we're going to fight you again at school on Monday. And at least as Cuffy tells it, that's why he brought his gun. I don't know that I would call that bullying. I don't think, but he certainly was prepared for some violence.
I read that as well, and I think Cuffy did indicate that he did not want to fight.
Well, that's right.
He who?
Cuffy.
Cuffy.
the
But he
shooter.
also was saying that he was calling people and asking who won the fight. Did I win the fight Friday? So
Yeah,
it's just very confusing. This is
Right.
drama between
This is
teenagers
kids.
happens all the time. It's a perpetual challenge for faculty, counselors, principals at every school. It's one of the reasons that if you get into a fist fight at school, everybody involved gets suspended because you don't want to spend the next 3 weeks trying to tease out who said the first insult and who threw the
Right.
first punch.
So the shooter, Jatwan Cuffy, surrendered peacefully to police after having gone to see his math teacher, evidently who talked him down, or they had a conversation before he turned himself into police. What have we heard, if anything, from the math teacher?
Nothing. I've been trying to reach that person. I think probably almost everybody involved in covering this has, and I believe it's a female based on the police statements, so I think she has not chosen to speak. Sort of the general idea has been, they've said we don't want media interviews. We want our faculty to be able to focus on, dealing with their own trauma, dealing with their students. There have been, I think, a number of posts on social media. I wrote about a teacher, gym teacher, who did a video, and I think a lot of them felt like there was so much second guessing, and this is such a difficult line to draw. You have to ask questions. You have to, especially if you're a parent, you reasonably, have concerns about how it was handled. And I think people feel like they're questioning sort of this anonymous CMS power structure. But what the teachers, I think a lot of them felt like was they're questioning us. They're criticizing us. The whole idea that they didn't dismiss school right away, that they went to their...
And we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to
But,
that.
some of the teachers felt like, please, understand that we are doing our best for our kids.
Cuffy waived his rights, as I understand it, and gave Matthews police his version of what happened. Do any of us know if a lawyer was present for that?
It does not indicate one in the felony affidavit. That was a pretty
Can a
detailed
16-year-old waive his rights?
That's an interesting question. I mean, you can be tried as an adult, I think, so that means you're attached to all the rights that you have. But it is an interesting question in my mind. As I read, it seems pretty quickly after this, he just sat down, waived his rights, and started talking. That was a question that came through my mind, but not one that I've heard any person with a law degree challenge.
So now we know that the gun that he used was stolen from a car, I think, in Gaston County back in August, I think. Do we know how he came to be in possession of it?
I have not heard anything about that. One would assume he bought it from someone.
So security at all CMS schools has been beefed up twice in recent years, or most recently following the Parkland High School shooting last year. Millions of dollars have been spent, but clearly they haven't been able to stop guns from finding their way onto campuses.
One of the things that we know now is that we have some access control issues that we didn't know before. So we're going to review those things. We also know that our investment in some high-end technology, while timely, is after action. It doesn't stop the intruder from coming in.
Charlotte Mecklenburg School Superintendent Clayton Wilcox, who will be on this program for the hour on Monday, talking about lessons learned from this incident. CMS does not check every book bag that comes in. They declined to install metal detectors. CMPD Chief Kerr Putney, who will be on the show on Tuesday, has repeatedly urged CMS to wand everyone who enters a school building. CMS decided not to. What impact might this incident have on those decisions?
Well, I
And
think...
we'll ask that question again.
Right, and it will be interesting to hear what Dr. Wilcox says. I mean, on the one hand, when you have a dead student on one side of the scale, it almost seems like nothing you can talk about can counterbalance that. But on the other hand, and we've discussed this on the show many, many times, as there have been mass shootings elsewhere, the practical issues are just kind of overwhelming because CMS has a number of campuses, schools that are not one contained building, but are a campus with multiple buildings spread over multiple acres. To fully control access and screen everybody who comes in, you're either talking about metal detectors at every door, and I think school board member Margaret Marshall said she was visiting one of these large schools and she stopped counting doors at 50.
Yeah.
Or you essentially build a wall around the school and have 2 or 3 access points and you screen people as they come in. That's not only money, but that's a huge amount of time daily, a huge amount of staff daily.
You can't guarantee people's safety in any setting completely. You just can't. It's impossible. And this seems to me to be a societal problem, not a school problem. And we've asked the schools to take care of a lot of societal problems. They really can't take care of this, can they? Really?
Well, and I think, again, there's sort of a reasonable response of, well, we need to know about conflicts, we need to try to diffuse them, we need to try to protect them. But yes, there's the physical screening. Can they barricade all the violence that's out there in the world and keep it out of schools? And there's also the question of how much responsibility and how much ability do faculty have to know about every conflict that's out there? Because most of them are just stuff that goes on. It's still a big distraction from learning. Kids are fighting.
And this conflict didn't necessarily start in a school building. It started in a grocery store parking lot. There may have been something that led up to that fight in the parking lot, but why would students, and it happened on a Friday night, why would teachers even be aware of it?
Right. And sadly, it's not uncommon to have students killed in armed conflicts. It just usually doesn't happen at school.
So we've witnessed these mass shootings at schools all over the country, and this was a single student shooting a single student with no intent to hurt anybody else, and probably no intent to hurt the student that he shot, at least initially. And I don't want to minimize this tragedy or what people are going through because of this tragedy, either the parents of either student or the friends of those students or the teachers and faculty and staff of those schools. But this seems to have been so quiet in Charlotte. We had a vigil last night, but the shock value of this seems to be really low. Am I wrong about this, Glenn?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I just think that there's so much going on right now in the world, not just in the world, but even here in Charlotte. And I think to some degree, and I wrote a column about this earlier in the week, I think we as a nation, we've almost become numb to violence. It's almost become expected. We go a month, 2 months, and then something else happens. So I think to some degree that quiet you're hearing kind of reflects a new norm for us.
And I don't think this is something that would generate protests. I think there is a lot of grief, there is a lot of concern, and you hate to say it could have been worse. And that does say something about our society, that was the first thought that came to my mind when an editor called and said, get to Butler, one student shot, one in custody, at least it wasn't a mass shooting, but also at least nothing bad happened after the student fired the gun. He was not in any way manhandled by police. It seems like if you have to have this kind of thing, there's not a lot of people to be angry at. Not that there isn't some anger, there is.
Well, there was some anger among parents, particularly on Monday morning. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the decision that the school made to go to second period after the lockdown was completed and why that happened and who had to come forward to explain why that happened when we come back with Ann Doss-Helms, Glenn Berkins, Nick Oxner, and Steve Harrison. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and doctors making house calls, 105 primary care and specialty clinicians helping complex patients avoid unnecessary ER visits and hospitalizations. Positions available throughout North Carolina. Info at doctorsmakinghousecalls.com. And the League of Women Voters of North Carolina offering vote411.org, a nonpartisan election resource with offerings like customized ballots and comparisons of candidates' unedited views. Vote411.org. Coming up Monday on this program, Clayton Wilcox will be here. He's the superintendent of Charlotte's Mecklenburg schools, obviously here to talk about what happened this past Monday at Butler High School, and again, a gun carried into Garinger High School with no incident reported surrounding that gun. But nonetheless, after millions of dollars being spent on security, what have been the lessons learned in all of this, and where do we go from here? Clayton Wilcox, Monday at 9.
Pittsburgh's message to America: stop the hate.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has to start with you as our leaders.
More rallies, more rhetoric, a surge in early voting, and what you can and cannot do about the 14th Amendment. The Friday News Roundup next time on 1A.
The roundup of the week's news continues with the Friday News Roundup at 10, right after the Charlotte Talks Local News Roundup, here on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's the local news roundup on Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Nick Oxner is here from WBTV News, and Oz Helms from the Charlotte Observer, Steve Harrison from WFAE News, and Glenn Berkins, editor-publisher of QCityMetro.com. We've been talking at least mostly about the shooting that happened on Monday at Butler High School. CMS has active shooter drills. And although they have these drills, we heard the confusion in the halls in that very first clip we played about 15 minutes ago. And we have to remember that it is the students and faculty and staff who goes through these drills, not the parents. And when the school went into lockdown, many of the parents gathered nearby and were told they had to wait off campus, but they were having none of that.
We're going to get our kids. Yes. We will march back with our children. Yes. I would encourage Matthews Police, please provide us safety as we cross this major highway. Are you going over to the school now? We're going.
So those parents gathered nearby because they had been notified of the shooting.
I didn't get a phone call, just got an email that there was a lockdown, but I haven't heard anything since then. We weren't getting answers, and some parents were really upset, so that made me more nervous that maybe something else would happen because parents weren't getting answers.
So talk about how the school handled this with students and parents during that lockdown and the period before the lockdown.
Well, and I think this, again, illustrates, I don't think they did a perfect job of communicating, and they would say the same thing, but it's almost impossible because the minute you hear shots, you hear screams, you hear people running, things are going out on social media, kids are texting their parents, CMS can't really send out an e-blast that says, oh my gosh, something bad's happening at Butler, we're not sure what it is, we'll tell you later. So they did a lockdown, and because students had not gone to class yet, it was right before the bell had rung, they just basically grabbed students and got them into whatever safe place there was because they didn't know if this was going to turn into a bigger thing. So the students and the teachers were locked into whether it was locker rooms or classrooms or, offices, while police were trying to figure, there were, about 10 minutes, which had to have felt like 10 hours when they didn't know
and
exactly.
The policy is to put them in safe rooms and barricade the doors and not get them out of the school.
Right.
Why?
Well, they have done these active survival drills, and I think that the teachers supposedly have been trained that if it appears that there is somebody coming toward your room, and I'm not sure how you know whether it is.
Well, and one of the worst things you can do in an active shooter situation is put everyone outside where there could be more shooters. So I don't think there's anything wrong with barricading kids while you try to figure out what's going on.
So
it was about 45 minutes after the incident that they started notifying parents that there has been this incident, the school's on lockdown, we are not going to release anybody until the lockdown is lifted by law enforcement. Naturally, parents started coming right away.
Right.
I mean, even if you hear that it's only one, that doesn't matter to you until you are absolutely certain that your child is not that one.
They didn't tell which one.
Right, and I don't know actually how.
They probably didn't know at the time either.
Yeah, and I don't know how Bobby McKeithen's parents found out.
So we'll talk about that in a second too. But were Matthews police in charge of this? Did they try to stop the parents, or did they just let them go to the school front door?
Well, I was not with that group, so I'm not quite sure what happened. But I do know that what the school was saying is if we started releasing students directly from wherever they were, we weren't going to know who we had and who we didn't. And even so, one of the first people I encountered was a dad who said, I encouraged my son to sneak out the back door, so we're leaving. And the next I encountered a couple of students who said, we just walked out.
So we had reports of these angry parents and people upset about the way this was handled and the lack of information, et cetera. And we had Clayton Wilcox coming out and saying it was a bullying incident and they'd be looking into it. And obviously some methods and security procedures failed. But it took a Facebook post by Butler PE teacher Van Barkley to explain to parents what actually happened and why they changed classes and went to second period.
This was not done so we could resume a normal school day, as many of you have heard. We did not teach yesterday. We did not test yesterday. Instead, we moved our students to second block so we could account for where they were. Teachers are there for their students to provide any support that they needed. We mourned together. We reflected together. We were there for each other.
Why did it take an individual teacher on Facebook to get that information out?
Well, Dr. Wilcox was sort of trying to say that. He is not a polished communicator, whether you consider that a strength or a weakness. Sometimes the way he says things, it's a little hard to figure out what he's actually trying to say, and he didn't say it quite as clearly as this wrestling. He did better, actually, on Tuesday night when he was speaking to the school board, but at that point, people were already clicking like crazy on this teacher's Facebook account. So, they're trying to communicate a whole lot of different things, and their message to parents and to the media said, classes will proceed on campus today for students remaining on campus. And that it was that classes will proceed
Right.
that I think people took as the phrase that you heard a lot was business as usual. I don't think that literally came from anybody at CMS. I can't
Did they, in
swear to
fact,
it.
dismiss after they got students into the classrooms where they were supposed to be so they could identify who was in attendance and who was not? Did they then release the students?
I think they only released students as parents came to get them.
Okay.
I don't actually know when the last student
Putting them in a
left.
classroom, everybody knows where everybody's supposed to be at
Yeah.
second period. So putting them in a classroom, if a parent came to the front door, they would know where to go to find their child.
Right, and once that actually started, they had sign-out sheets. When we started seeing families coming out a little later, once that process had been started, it seemed pretty orderly. They were saying, I called the name, they brought him out, we walked out.
So let's get back to this bullying. We don't know exactly what happened. We don't know who bullied whom or if in fact there was any bullying involved, but the shooting victim's mom, Ashley Mewborn, insists that her son is not a bully.
He was not a bully. He took care of all of his siblings and made sure all of them were okay. He had the biggest heart. And regardless of that, no matter what kind of person he was, he still did not deserve to be shot and killed at school.
And the victim's father, also named Bobby McKeithen, said the school should have done more to head off the fight and to warn him and his wife that a situation was brewing. But when he spoke to the media, he also expressed his condolences to the family of the boy who shot his son.
I have remorse for the family that, the shooting was done by, because they about to lose the child too as well in the system and stuff. So, I'm not having no hatred or ill will towards anybody about things, but at the end of the day, like I said, we have to get to the point where, as a community, as a state, as a nation, what do we do to address this gun problem and save our children?
That is a remarkable approach to this from a man who just lost his son. That's remarkable to me. In fairness, could the school have been aware of the situation before it happened? Could they have warned the parents of these two children that
I don't
there
know,
was
and I
trouble
don't know to
brewing?
what extent the families knew. We
Right.
have heard secondhand that Jatwan's mother went to the school with concerns about what was going on. We have not been able to verify that that's the case. I asked very explicitly, have either of the students been identified as either perpetrators or victims of bullying, and they said we can't release individual student information. Bullying is kind of a buzzword. Again, was it a fight? Was it bullying?
Once again, we'll have Clayton Wilcox on this program on Monday to talk about this and about school security and what they've learned about this and what they know about this story as the weekend goes on. Perhaps they'll learn more over the weekend. Bail for the shooter, Jatwan Cuffey, was denied. Where is he now? How long might he be there?
He's in the Mecklenburg County Jail, and his next court date is the 7th, which is next.
Is that where 16-year-old got put?
He's being tried as an adult.
So you spoke to a lawyer, Nick.
Yes.
And the lawyer says he believes, and it's not Jatwan's lawyer, but he believes that he has a good self-defense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked to Brad Smith, criminal defense attorney in town, about, after some of the details started emerging, the video of the shooting, emerged on Instagram. And Brad Smith, the lawyer, says, look, I think that, it is a felony to bring a gun to school. It's a felony to fire a gun at school. But Brad's point was, all that notwithstanding, if this hadn't been on school grounds, you'd absolutely have a self-defense argument, and it is hard to take that argument away simply because you're on school grounds. The video shows Bob McKeithen appearing to make the first acts of aggression, throwing the first punch on Jatwan Cuffey before Cuffey pulls the gun out. And so Brad Smith says, look, I think that anywhere else in this country you have a right to defend yourself, and he's not so sure that doesn't apply to kids at school.
This is a different conversation. It has nothing to do with these children, but when did we get to the point where you respond to a fist fight with a gun?
At some point.
And I think it's unfortunate, right? This is a normal teenage argument that escalated way out of control. And is it because Jatwan Cuffey didn't feel like he could go report being afraid that day at school? Is it because he thought guns were okay? Is it because Bobby McKeithen didn't have any outlets that he felt like he could turn to voice his anger and frustration on other things? I think these are bigger systemic questions.
Fights at school are nothing new. They've been around as long as there have been high schools.
Absolutely.
And sadly, guns being involved is not terribly new either. It just usually doesn't happen in the schoolhouse.
But there was a time when it didn't happen. There was a time when guys fought at school and they settled their argument with fists.
So, but it's within the realm of possibility, according to the attorney you spoke to, that he could get off the murder charge, but be charged with convicted of the felony charge.
Yeah, and technically speaking, what he did qualifies to be charged with first-degree murder because the death occurred in the commission of other felonies, which is the bringing the gun to school and shooting the gun. Those are both lesser felonies, right, than murder. And so technically you could charge him with felony murder, which would be first-degree murder. That being said, again, the lawyer says, look, at some point you've got to, you do have a right to defend yourself in this country on school grounds or otherwise. And so, talking with him, he says, look, should he face some other charges that aren't first-degree murder? Probably, but I think the sense that I got from that interview was the first-degree murder was a stretch.
So the Butler High School student was the first time we believe it's the first time that a firearm has been discharged in a school.
No, there's at least one other that I know of at East Mech, but it was apparently an accidental discharge.
Okay.
A student did bring a loaded gun. It went off. It grazed a couple of students, but certainly the first fatality, and very, very rare to see.
But guns at CMS are an ongoing problem. They've reported more guns on school grounds than any other North Carolina district for years. 19 were found at schools during the 2016-17 school year. The Observer has asked for those figures for last year, and you haven't gotten them yet, correct? And in fact, the very next day, on Tuesday of this week, police confiscated a gun from a student at Garinger High School. How did they find out that student had the gun on campus?
Someone, and one would assume it was probably a fellow student, went to the administration and said, this person has a gun, and they did. I haven't read elaborate details of what happened, but this is...
Know why he carried the gun?
No, I don't know any details about that incident. And most often we don't actually know about these incidents unless either we hear about it somehow and ask, and then they will generally answer. You're old enough to remember when Peter Gorman decided he was actually going to send out daily or weekly roundups of all the incidents like this at schools in the interest of transparency, and he discontinued that because he said he ended up with a lot of TV people using that to fill their, their days standing out in front of schools saying, another scary thing at this school. So they don't go out of their way to let us know.
You didn't have to qualify that. I'm old enough to remember Peter. What's his name? Gorman.
Yes.
Tell me more about how you remember him, Mike.
That's right. All right. Following the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, our state legislature became more active in their approach to enhancing school safety. They did appropriate more money. Is that right?
They have asked for more money. They're talking about, well, they did appropriate some more, I think, this time around. And then they're saying it would take another $71.5 million in the coming year. And this is focused mostly on, again, support staff who would help with social and emotional needs, with everybody thinks that prevention is the best approach. And that's one of the things that Dr. Wilcox has said. Nobody's going to disagree with that. If you can somehow diffuse conflicts, if you can help students deal with their anger or with their fear, of course that's better than, dealing with an actual shooting.
Is this incident likely to spur the legislature into spending more money on this?
I think lawmakers are taking this issue very seriously. In fact, the school safety committee is meeting again today in Sanford, and they certainly were paying attention after this incident on Monday. And this committee's convened and has done some work traveling around the state, talking to stakeholders about this, and they've not been flashy about it. That's how you know they're actually serious, because they haven't sent 80 million newsletters and put it in campaign ads, and no one's been running around this week saying, boy, sure, wish we need to do more about this. And so, in my opinion and from my experience, the quieter they do their job and keep their heads down, the more something might actually get done.
So the school shooting at Butler on Monday was followed in the wake 2 days earlier of the murder of 11 worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. The outpouring of horror has come from all over the country and from people of all faiths. And Rabbi Murray Ezring of Charlotte's Temple Israel called the shooting an attack on all faiths.
Because it seems to be an attack on the goals that religion sets that we believe come from God, that we should be living together in peace and unity and improving the world together. And there seem to be people who just cannot abide by that kind of thinking.
So, Glenn, you wrote a column in QCityMetro.com in which you say you believe we are rapidly approaching a moment of emotional crisis where this ongoing series of senseless killings will leave us numb. Has that happened already, you think?
I think it's happened to some degree. I still think that we intrinsically feel something when something like that happens, but the continuous drip of these shootings, we're not as shocked as we used to be when things like that happen. As I said earlier, it seems that every 2, 3, 4 months there's another mass shooting in this country.
Well, at the end of that piece, you wrote, I cannot properly grieve the loss of life in Pittsburgh because it has forced me back to relive that unspeakable day in 2015 when a white supremacist walked into that Charleston church and opened fire. And then you say, to whom do we cry? Which is something that you got from an interview of a Rwandan person.
Yes, in 94, I covered the genocide in Rwanda. And at the end of that, after so many people had died, I sat with a man and one of the questions that I asked him was why so few people cried. I rarely saw anyone cry during all the time I spent there. And he looked at me as if I had asked some silly question, and then he finally said, everyone here has lost someone. To whom would we cry? And that just crystallized it. And I think we're reaching that point in this country where groups, as I said, I could not properly grieve what happened there because it brought back very painful memories of what happened in Charleston.
Does that numbness, you think, lead to inaction, to a sense of hopelessness, or do you think people eventually snap out of it and demand change?
Well, I was uplifted. There was an interfaith service on Tuesday. It was hosted by men and at First Baptist Church West, and there were so many people who came out, hundreds of people from all faith traditions, and it was just a wonderful outpouring.
We still have other things to talk about, including the fact that the midterm election is Tuesday, and early voting has been surging at the polls. What will that mean? We'll talk about that when we come back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Novant Health, which is committed to creating an environment where all doctors, nurses, and team members can thrive while providing personalized care to the community. Details at novanthealth.org/remarkable team. The News Roundup will continue in 20 minutes with the national and international news on 1A with Joshua Johnson and his panel of reporters. They will look at the mass shooting, of course, last weekend at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the midterm elections coming up next week, and President Trump's statement that he wants to end birthright citizenship for children of non-citizens and unauthorized immigrants in the United States. Just some of the things they'll be talking about in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A, and we will continue with the local news roundup on Charlotte Talks coming up in about, 35 seconds. Stay with us.
This week, on a brand new episode of the Amplifier podcast, we hear from Charlotte-based opera singer Melinda Whittington.
It's something that I think all genres of classical music especially are really having to think about right now. How do we make this accessible to everyone, not just financially, but also the manner and the approach?
Listen to the Amplifier podcast for free on Spotify, NPR One, and WFAE.org/amplifier. Amplifier is powered by Ortho Carolina.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup. Steve Harrison is here from WFAE News, Ann Doss Helms from The Observer, Glenn Berkins from QCityMetro.com, and Nick Oxner from WBTV News. Just to finish up on the story in Pittsburgh, which was a national story, but it touched almost everybody because it was so heinous. The man who pulled the trigger in Pittsburgh made a lot of anti-Semitic posts, evidently, on a website I'd never heard of called Gab, G-A-B, which describes itself as a champion of free speech. I know that they've taken that site down, at least temporarily, but several years ago, Mecklenburg County State Senator Dan Bishop evidently invested $500. Not a big investment, but he invested $500 in Gab, and it's election season. So this has raised some eyebrows. Why, Steve, did he invest?
So the senator said that he was upset. I guess if you go back to around 2016, Twitter and Facebook were having all sorts of problems trying to kind of clean up their sites and get rid of hate speech. So Gab comes in as an alternative, it's like a pure free market platform, no censorship, anything goes. And so Dan Bishop, at the time in August 2017, wrote on Twitter that he had kind of had enough with San Francisco. I think he said thought police. He was going to invest in Gab.
Because that's where all these companies like
That's
Facebook
right.
and Twitter are. They're
And
not
so then
Silicon Valley.
he tweets that no one pays any attention. And then the Daily Mail in England kind of links him as an investor to Gab, and it kind of blows up locally. And then Dan Bishop kind of wrote back and said he doesn't use the site. And it was interesting. He said it wasn't that he attacked the speech, the hate speech, which I think everyone would do. He kind of attacked the platform for allowing it and saying if that's what they condone and promote, they should go out of business. And in saying that, he kind of sounded exactly like the San Francisco thought police that he had criticized a year earlier.
So his opponent in that race, Chad Stakowitz,
that's right,
released a statement saying Bishop was, quote, funding a platform for hate speech, and that led Dan Bishop to saying he was being smeared. Who's right about this? Whose characterization is correct?
I think it's interesting in that this was not, it is election season, but like I said, this came out of the Daily Mail, so this was not if this was a kind of a Democratic operation, it was a very strange way for them to go about it, to send the story to England and then have it come here. So it's, I think it was just, it happened to be, the timing of the election was not really primary.
At the interfaith service, Rabbi Asher Knight of Temple Bethel talked about rhetoric, and I don't think he was necessarily talking about this particular Gab, but he said rhetoric matters, and he said that racism and anti-Semitism and xenophobia and homophobia, said, quote, that it's like throwing a match into a parched forest. There is enough fuel there to lead to violent explosions, and basically said that's what happened.
And if you give permission, through example of highly placed leaders, if you give permission to say these things, then people will do it. They'll say these things.
Someone will act on it, inevitably.
Election day, obviously Tuesday. Early voting, though, has been going on for about a week or so, and it's been, evidently, turnout here has been really high. How many have we had turnout here and around the state to vote early?
So I think as of yesterday, it was about 1.5 million.
Wow. How high is that?
So if you kind of compare, not as high as 2016 at this point, but much, much higher than 2014, much, much higher than 2010. I think kind of the stepping back, if you're a Republican and you look at the statewide early voting numbers, you have to be happy because their numbers were, everyone's grown, but their numbers had grown much faster than anyone else. Now, I think in recent days, the Democratic numbers are kind of catching up and starting to close. African American voting is also catching up. It had been down kind of compared to white voting. But I think Republican voters are kind of behaving a little bit kind of like those Obama Democrats did over the last 8 years, where they were so excited to get out and vote early. And I think a lot of their supporters really want to cast a vote for the president.
But I have figures here that say statewide Democrats are behind from previous years. They're running 89% of their total from 2014. Republicans are voting at 97% of that year. And early voting among black voters is running about 60,000 votes behind compared to previous years. So we understand why this was supposed to be the blue wave year. Why are Republicans energized and African Americans and other Democrats are not? Not that all African Americans are Democrats, mind you, but why?
Well, I think, and I don't know, I think a lot of people were surprised by that. I think there were fewer Sunday voting. But I think, like I said, with those numbers, I think that the gaps are closing as we get closer to November 6th.
And Mecklenburg does have its first weekend voting coming up this weekend with Saturday and Sunday polls open.
So is Sunday voting is a key day in the black community for voting, and they've taken a couple of those days away, right?
I think there was a souls to the polls, as they call it. Was that last Sunday or the Sunday before last? Yeah, last Sunday. It's a key day, but it's not a make or break day by any means.
So there's a couple things. WRAL in Raleigh released an interesting data-driven map and analysis yesterday that found the changes in location of early voting. So Republicans in General Assembly would tell you they changed the law to have more hours of early voting. But because of funding and a number of other factors, they're in fewer locations. And so in rural counties, this WRAL analysis found, there's actually voting is down, mostly because the locations are farther away from some people. So that's an interesting statistic. But I'd say that all of the Republican operatives that I talked to are downright ecstatic about the amount of Republicans going to vote early. That being said, with the caveat, people are still a little concerned about specifically Mecklenburg County because they've not seen what they would expect the surge in Mecklenburg County in their races compared to the rest of the state.
And I do need to correct myself. That was actually last weekend that they had the weekend voting, I believe. So I don't want to send people out to the wrong place.
Because weekend voting ends on Saturday here.
I was going to say one more thing, too. I think with Republicans and that they've come out early to vote, I think that's very encouraging for them. But one kind of caveat is that the Republicans don't have – I think they have cannibalized themselves a little bit. I think 30% or so of Republicans who voted early voted on Election Day last time, and I don't think they have as much room to grow as the Democratic Party. They have a set number of voters. They just can't. They don't expand their pool as much as Democrats can. So I think they have a bit of a ceiling.
Nick over here is going to be getting a raise soon because he works for a TV station, and the money is rolling in because
I wish
of
it worked
season.
that way.
You report, Steve, that the North Carolina Democratic Party and individual donors are pouring money into Mecklenburg's 6 competitive state house and Senate races and have significantly outraised Republican incumbents. GOP political consultant Larry Shaheen says there has never been this influx of cash from outside the county. How much of an impact is money likely to have? Because we've noticed in recent elections that sometimes money doesn't have any impact at all.
I think, first of all, if you watch, cable TV during the day, it's just ad after ad after ad. And these are for state house and Senate races, which is it's just not. These people aren't household names. This isn't the McCready-Harris race.
Right.
And the Democratic Party, there are 2 seats in Mecklenburg that are they're contesting every seat, but they put their most money in arguably their 2 hardest seats to win in North Mecklenburg and Matthews and Hill. So they've kind of gone all in. They've not pulled back and said, we're going to be strategic and focus and give these up. And they're trying to play offense everywhere.
Former North Carolina Democratic Governor Jim Hunt's daughter, Rachel Hunt, has raised the most money. She's running against Bill Brawley. We all know him from the Matthews CMS what's it called? Fracas about
and before that,
schools.
the fracas over toll roads. Yes.
All right. So that's the House District 103 seat. She's brought in $1.26 million. How is she spending it? Do we know?
A lot of television.
A lot of television.
A lot of mail.
You are getting that raise.
I'm not getting the raise, but we might make our budget this year. But, it's interesting. A chunk of that came from a donation from the Democratic Party that followed just days after a contribution from her father, Governor Jim Hunt, to the Democratic Party itself of multiple six figures. So.
Okay. We found out this week that Mecklenburg Republican State House member Andy Doolin was arrested in Ohio in July for DUI. Doolin calls this a last-minute smear campaign by the Democrats and their liberal allies at the Charlotte Observer. That's a quote. But Republican State Senator Dan Bishop, Republican, has called for Andy Doolin, Republican, to step down.
So I think what happened here is Dan Bishop represents a Senate seat, which covers a lot of South Charlotte. Andy Doolin's House seat covers a lot of South Charlotte, so a lot of the same voters. In Dan Bishop's race, his Democratic opponent had gotten a DUI 10 years ago, and he has been attacked kind of relentlessly over it. Fair, not fair, but an absolute massive amount of negative mail over a DWI. So then all of a sudden, Dan Bishop's colleague gets a DWI 4 months ago, and what do you do with that? If you've really hammered someone for that 10 years ago. And so Bishop said his colleague should step down.
And?
Radio silence.
Well, if you need any more proof that overt racism in America exists, all you have to do is look to Charlotte's South Park area, or possibly Myers Park. We'll talk about that in a second. In the middle of October, ugly, racist confrontation took place in the parking lot of Camden Fairview Apartments, where two African-American women were verbally accosted just for being there. Cell phone video captured the moment. It was posted recently on Twitter, where the Twitter sphere immediately deemed the woman you're about to hear as South Park Susan. But in Q City Metro, Glenn, you dubbed her Myers Park Meg, since she says somewhere in this conversation that she lives there.
Who are you? Do you live
No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere.
Is your boyfriend here? Is your baby daddy here? Nobody cares.
Ma'am, if you
white
touch
and
me-
I'm hot. I'm white and I'm hot. So what are you doing here?
This incident of waiting for AAA while being black occurred on October the 19th. We heard only a portion of the altercation. The African-American women say they repeatedly asked this woman to leave them alone as they waited for AAA to help with car trouble. She disputed that there was a car involved, this white woman. So aside from being hot and white, and I guess she means by hot, that when was this, October? I mean, it was probably still warm outside.
I don't think that's what she meant.
Okay. She bragged to these women that she makes $125,000 a year. And I should say that she made $125,000 a year because she worked for Spectrum Enterprises, and they have now fired her for this, but not before having an impact on the women that she verbally abused. One of those women, Mary Garris, said this to reporters.
We are so distraught and still very upset about what has taken place only because of the color of our skin. It is so upsetting to know that today we still have this overt racism that's going on in 2018.
So things just get uglier and uglier. The woman throwing the slurs was later identified as Susan J. Westwood. Has she spoken to the media or apologized?
I don't think she's been located.
No, she can't be
Police are still
found.
looking for
Yeah,
her.
police are now trying to serve her with criminal charges, criminal paperwork, and they can't find her, according to CMPD.
This probably shocks a lot of people who heard the piece of tape that we just played from the woman verbally accosting these African-American women. Would this shock the black community, Glenn?
Well, I'm not sure this should shock anyone at this point. We've seen these incidents all over the country. It's sad that it finally happened here in Charlotte, but this story will end up being the biggest story of the year for Q City Metro, believe it or not.
Really?
Yes. Our server actually crashed. So many people were going online to read the story. If you're in the black community, or if you're in the white community and you've been paying attention, you've met other people all over the country who've accosted African Americans who were doing seemingly innocent things, barbecuing, a little 7-year-old selling bottled water in California, Just the most innocuous, everyday things that people do. We've had law enforcement called on us. So I don't think this should shock anyone.
Look, I'm shocked when I hear this because I'm shocked every time I see this over and over again because why is this still happening?
The only thing I'm shocked about is that people are still crazy enough to do it.
Yeah.
In the internet age, not
Right.
because I think that people are inherently that's not within them, but there have been so many incidents, and these people always lose their jobs. I just don't understand
Yeah, it's
why.
kind of become like a genre with the cute names and the white women.
Exactly.
Usually they call the police, and in this case, she actually did. After the black women called the police on her, she called 911 and is now being charged with misuse of that system.
Well, although no one on the staff knew it at the time of its publication, 31-year-old Creative Loafing printed their last issue this week, and then the owner promptly laid off the entire staff.
Right after we sent it to print at noon, at about 12:04, we all started realizing that our emails were locked. And then 5 minutes later, our publisher, who doesn't even live in Charlotte, knocked on the door. He told us basically, you guys are all out of jobs. I've sold the brand to my son, who has absolutely no experience in anything. And none of you guys will be a part of this. He gave us 5 minutes to clear everything out of our desks and leave because he said people were coming in to move our stuff.
That's former Creative Loafing editor Ryan Pitkin. Steve, although you're with us now, you spent years in the newspaper business, and you spent years in the newspaper business. Glenn, you did too. How did this affect you? What does it say to you? We only have 30 seconds.
It's primarily a continuation of what we've seen. It's not just Creative Loafing. Village Voice has gone. Some other alternative weeklies are gone. It's a very tough business.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that because you're speechless. Handled with class, don't you think, though?
Oh, yeah. It was, again, everything that you see these days, you wonder if it's a spoof, and then it turns out to be real.
Ann Doss Helms from The Observer, Glenn Berkins from QCityMetro.com, Nick Oxner from WBTV News, and Steve Harrison, reporter for WFAE News. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte